The black and white checkered floor of Rose's diner reflected the fluorescent lights overhead like a mirror made of ice. November 3rd, 3:22 in the morning. The marble-like tiles gleamed under the harsh glow, and in that moment, everything about Mia Rivera's life was about to change. The front door of the diner burst open. Not gently. Not with the usual chime that rang when customers arrived for late-night coffee and eggs. This door slammed against the wall with a violence that made the windows rattle. Wind poured in, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of Philadelphia rain and something else. Something metallic. Something like fear. A man collapsed face-first onto the checkered floor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a tailored white dress shirt that had been pristine moments before but now bloomed with crimson. The blood spread across the marble pattern like a flower growing in real time. Dark hair, slicked back with product. A scar running from his eye to his cheekbone. A face that should have looked dangerous. Instead, it looked like a mask of a god that had been shattered. Two men in black suits stood frozen behind him. Sergio and Franco. Both in their early 40s. Both carrying weapons under their jackets. Both trained to handle threats. But this threat was not external. This threat was bleeding onto the floor in front of them, and neither of them knew what to do. Mia Rivera stood behind the counter, holding a coffee pot. She had been pouring for a trucker named Dale who came in every Tuesday at 3 in the morning, ordered black coffee, said nothing, left $2. But she was not looking at Dale anymore. She was looking at the man on the floor. At the crimson spreading. At the two men whose faces had gone completely white. The coffee pot fell from her hand. It shattered against the edge of the counter, and brown liquid splashed across her yellow waitress uniform, mixing with the blood that was already beginning to pool across the black and white tiles. She did not think. That was the thing that would matter later, when everyone asked her why she did what she did. She did not think. She moved. Mia dropped to her knees beside the man. The cold marble bit into her skin through her uniform. She could smell his cologne, expensive, layered over the iron scent of blood. She could feel his breathing, shallow and slowing, and something inside her chest cracked open like an egg. Her hands moved on instinct. She ripped open his dress shirt. The remaining buttons scattered across the floor like broken teeth. His chest was broad, muscled, and covered in a tattoo that ran from his collarbone to his ribs. An image she did not have time to understand. The wound was high, just below his right shoulder, and it was still bleeding, still pouring, still stealing his life with every passing second. Mia pressed both her hands against the wound with all her weight. Her hands were shaking. She had no medical training. She had never taken a CPR class. She had never done anything heroic in her entire life. She had spent the last 8 years working double shifts at a diner, counting pennies, trying to keep her son Noah fed while creditors called and her landlord Harold Brennan threatened to throw them onto the street. But she knew what it meant to refuse to let something die. She began compressions. Her hands moved in desperate rhythm against his chest. Push, push, push. 1, 2, 3, 4. She leaned her body weight into it, feeling the cage of his ribs beneath her palms. His eyes fluttered open. For 1 second, maybe less, they focused on her face. On the nobody waitress in the stained yellow uniform, covered in his blood, her dark eyes wide with determination. Then they closed again. "Call an ambulance," Mia said. Her voice did not sound like her own. It sounded like someone who knew what they were doing. Someone who was not terrified. Someone who was not a single mother living on $2 in her wallet and a prayer that was not being answered. "He is not supposed to bleed," Sergio said. His voice was hollow, confused, like a child who had just learned that the rules of the world did not work the way he thought. "Call an ambulance." Mia did not look up from the compressions. Push, push, push. 1, 2, 3, 4. Franco moved. His hand shook as he pulled a phone from his pocket. The phone was encrusted with diamonds. It probably cost more than everything Mia owned. He dialed. His voice, when it came, was steady, but underneath the steadiness was something like panic. Something like desperation. He gave an address. An intersection. He said the words that made it clear this was not an ordinary emergency call. The man on the floor, whose name Mia did not know, whose face meant nothing to her, whose blood was soaking through her uniform and mixing with the coffee stain that had never quite come out, had a pulse that was fading. She kept pushing. The sirens came. They grew louder, then so loud that the windows of the diner seemed to vibrate in their frames. The ambulance arrived in 3 minutes. Paramedics in green uniforms poured through the door. One of them, a woman with red hair pulled back in a tight bun, took one look at the scene and said something into her radio that made her eyes go wide. "How long?" the paramedic asked. "I do not know," Mia whispered. "A few minutes." He was bleeding. "I could not let him." She did not finish. She did not know how to finish. They moved her aside gently. They took over the compressions. They hooked up machines that beeped and hummed. They worked with the kind of focused intensity that meant they were not sure if he was going to make it. That meant they were fighting the same battle Mia had been fighting. The paramedics asked questions. What happened? When did he collapse? Do you know his medical history? What is his name? Franco answered in monosyllables. Sergio said nothing. He was looking at Mia with an expression she could not read. It was something between gratitude and terror. The man was loaded into the ambulance. The doors closed. The sirens rose again, fading into the distance, carrying with them the most powerful person in Philadelphia, bleeding onto a stretcher, kept alive by the hands of a waitress who had $2 to her name and everything to lose. The diner fell silent. Just the hum of the fluorescent lights. The drip of the coffee pot still leaking from where it had fallen. The sound of Dale, the trucker, very quietly setting down his untouched cup of coffee and walking out the door without paying. Sergio turned to Mia. He was studying her face like he was trying to memorize something. "What is your name?" he asked. "Mia," she said. "Mia Rivera." "You saved his life," Sergio said. It was not a question. Mia looked down at her hands. They were covered in blood. The blood of a stranger. The blood of someone who mattered in ways she could not begin to understand. She had been so focused on staying alive, on keeping Noah alive, on making it through each day without breaking completely, that she had not thought about anything beyond the moment. She still did not know she had just saved the most feared Mafia boss in the country. She still did not know that in exactly 5 days, Harold Brennan was going to evict her from the apartment that had been her family's only shelter for 3 years. She did not know that she had $47 to last another week. She did not know that her son Noah was going to come home from school asking why the lights kept flickering, and she was not going to have an answer. But what was happening, in the minutes after the ambulance pulled away, was something that would ripple outward and change everything. Sergio was making a phone call. His voice was low, but in the quiet diner, Mia could hear every word. "He is breathing," Sergio said. "The paramedics are taking him to St. Mary's." "A woman." "Just a waitress." She pulled him back. There was a pause. Someone on the other end was speaking. Mia could not hear the words, but she could hear the tone. Sharp. Commanding. Dangerous. "I will handle it," Sergio said. He hung up the phone. He looked at Mia again. "Go home," he said. "Do not speak about this. Do not speak about him. Do not speak about anything you saw tonight." Mia nodded. She untied her apron. Her hands were still shaking. There was still blood under her fingernails. She clocked out without being asked. She walked to the door. The wind outside was still cold, still sharp, still carrying the smell of rain and something metallic. She did not know that everything had changed. She did not know that the moment her hands touched that man's chest, a clock had started ticking. A 5-day countdown. A reckoning. A collision between two worlds that should never have touched. She only knew that she was going to go home, wash the blood from her hands, sit beside her sleeping son, and count the hours until she had to be back at the diner for the morning shift. She did not know that the morning shift would never come. 6 hours earlier, at 6:47 in the morning, the world was still dark and cold and indifferent to the woman counting money at a kitchen table in a studio apartment on the north side of Philadelphia. Mia Rivera sat under a single bulb that flickered like a dying heartbeat. The bulb had been flickering for 2 weeks. She did not have money to replace it. The list in front of her was handwritten on the back of an old electric bill, and the numbers on that list had become more real to her than anything else in her life. $22,000 to loan sharks who had come to the door 3 times. $31,000 in medical debt from her husband's final hospitalization. $18,000 in credit cards. $14,000 owed to private lenders whose names she had never learned. The total sat at the bottom like a sentence, $85,000. 5 days. That was all that remained. Harold Brennan, her landlord, had been crystal clear when he'd slid the eviction notice under her door. November 23rd. That was when they would come with dolly carts and lock changes and the understanding that she had nowhere else to go. She did not own a car. She did not have family. She had a son who was 7 years old and still sleeping in his jacket because the heat in this apartment had been cut off 3 days ago, and the super would not turn it back on until the rent was paid. The rent she did not have. She opened her wallet. $2 lay there. Actual paper dollars, crumpled and soft from being handled so many times she had memorized the feel of them. $2 to last another week. $2 to buy milk for Noah's cereal, to pay for the bus she would take to the diner, to exist in a world that now operated on the mathematics of desperation. Noah slept on the pull-out couch across the studio apartment, his small frame curled under a blanket that had been Mia's in high school. His backpack lay beside him, books spilling out, his jacket still buttoned because she had learned not to undress him at night. It kept him warmer. His face in sleep was peaceful, untouched by knowledge of what was coming, and she held that image of his innocence like a prayer. At 4:15 in the afternoon, Mia walked out of the Rose's Diner kitchen with her apron still tied around her waist, tips counted and recounted 3 times to make sure she had not made an error. $23.47. Someone had left a quarter taped to their napkin with a note that said, "God bless you," and she had cried in the bathroom for 2 minutes before returning to the floor to clear tables and smile and pretend her hands were not shaking. The rain had intensified. It fell in sheets that made the November streets of Philadelphia gleam like dark glass. Red and blue neon signs reflected across the wet pavement. Umbrellas became useless within seconds. The cold cut through every layer of fabric she owned. Mia took the bus downtown. She watched the neighborhoods change, watched the streets transition from cracked sidewalks and boarded windows to polished storefronts and luxury hotels. The Velvet Room was located in the historic district, a 4-story brownstone with a black awning and a single white rose painted on the door. The kind of place where women wore dresses that cost more than her monthly rent. She arrived at 11:34 in the evening, soaking wet, a uniform sticking to her skin in a way that made her feel even more visible in her invisibility. That was the strange power of poverty, it made you stand out precisely because you did not belong. Pete Castellano was waiting in the staff room. He was a thick man with a balding head and gold rings on every finger, each ring catching the light as he gestured. His breath when he spoke to her reeked of whiskey and something expensive she could not identify. The other waitresses were present, hanging their coats, preparing for the night shift. Everyone stopped what they were doing. "Where is it?" Pete said. Mia's stomach dropped like a stone. "Where is what?" $300. Missing from the register 2 nights ago. You were working that night. You were the only one handling the safe deposit. I would never. Mia's voice came out small, thin, like paper. I have never stolen anything in my life. You are drowning in debt, Mia. Everyone knows it. You are desperate. Where else would the money go? The words landed like blows. She could see it in the other waitresses' faces, the calculation, the distance, the way they were already separating themselves from her. Nobody spoke. Nobody defended her. In that moment, she understood what it meant to be invisible. It meant that your suffering was not even worth the effort of denial. It meant that everyone already believed the worst about you because you had made the mistake of being poor where they could see it. "I need this job," she said. Her voice was trembling now, barely a whisper. "I have a son. I need this job." Pete stepped closer. "You need a lot of things, Mia. But you are fired. You are done. Leave immediately or I will call the police and tell them you stole from me. I think they will believe me. Do you think they will believe you?" She did not answer. There was no answer. She untied her apron with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. The apron fell to the floor. None of the other waitresses moved to pick it up. At 11:58 in the evening, Mia pushed open the door of the velvet room and stepped back into the November rain. The cold hit her like a physical thing, like a blade wrapping itself around her shoulders. She pulled her thin jacket, the only one she owned, the one with a zipper that did not quite close, tighter around her body. Her hair was soaked. Her uniform was soaked. She was alone on a street where luxury cars with tinted windows glided past like dark sharks. She could not afford the bus home. She could not afford any bus. That left her feet, and the rain, and the 40-minute walk through the city while her body shook and her mind calculated numbers that would not stop growing. 40 minutes. If she walked fast, if she did not stop to cry, if she kept moving, she could be home by 12:38 in the morning. Then she would have to sleep for 3 hours before returning to the Rose's Diner at 6 in the morning for the day shift. She would work that shift. She would smile. She would clear tables and make coffee and pretend that her entire life was not collapsing in real time. She passed restaurants with glowing windows where couples sat across candlelit tables, their hands touching, their laughter warm and enclosed and separate from the street. She passed a luxury hotel where a doorman in a uniform stood under an awning, dry and warm and present in a way that seemed impossible. She passed shop windows displaying clothes and jewelry and things that existed in a world that had never been hers and would never be. The rain hammered down. The wind carried the smell of wet asphalt and something metallic from the river. Her feet moved in their worn shoes, one step forward, then another, each one taking her further from the job she had just lost and closer to a home where her son was sleeping in his jacket because she could not pay to heat it. What Mia did not know, what she could not have known, was that her firing had been orchestrated by hands she had never seen. That there were people watching her, calculating her desperation, waiting for her to become vulnerable enough for what was coming next. That the moment she had saved a dying man in her diner with her own hands, a clock had started ticking. That everything from this point forward would move with the terrible inevitability of a trap closing. She only knew that she was tired. That she was cold. That she had $2 in her wallet and a son who needed milk and a landlord who was coming for everything in 5 days. She did not know that the 5 days were about to become the most important days of her entire life. The November rain hammered against the diner windows like it was trying to break through glass. Mia Rivera's hands trembled as she pressed them against the bleeding man's chest, her uniform soaked red, her mind screaming that this was impossible, that people did not collapse on marble floors at 3:22 in the morning asking for nothing but breath. His security team stood frozen, 3 men in dark suits, their hands on their weapons, their faces blank with shock. She had no training. She had no reason to act. She only knew that this man was dying and that her hands were the only thing between him and the floor. Footsteps. Running. The diner door swung open and more men poured in, moving with military precision, their shoes wet from rain, their voices clipped and urgent. Within 4 minutes, 3 black SUVs materialized outside. A private doctor rushed in with a medical bag and took over compressions. The man's eyes opened for one moment, locked onto hers, and something in that gaze, something desperate and human and completely without power, made her understand that she had just saved Alessandro Rossi, the most feared Mafia boss in Philadelphia. She had no idea. She had no idea at all. But that night, that impossible night, was only the beginning. Now let us go back. Back to the woman who had $2 in her wallet and a son sleeping in his jacket. Back to the moment before everything changed. Mia had been fired from the club at 6:44 p.m. on a Tuesday in November. The club owner, a man named Dimitri, had called her into his office, his face twisted with something like satisfaction. She stood in front of his desk, a desk made of mahogany that probably cost more than her annual rent, and listened while he accused her of stealing from the cash register. $50 missing. She had not taken 50 cents. But her word meant nothing against his. She was nobody. Just a night shift waitress in a city full of night shift waitresses. "You're finished here," Dimitri said, not even looking at her. "Don't come back." The rain started as she walked home through Philadelphia streets that suddenly felt hostile and strange. Her feet ached from standing for 8 hours. Her back ached from 8 years of hidden violence, a pain so constant she had almost stopped noticing it. Almost. The city blurred around her. Couples under awnings. Luxury hotels with doormen standing dry and warm. Shop windows filled with things that had never belonged to her and never would. She passed restaurants with glowing windows where people sat across candlelit tables, their hands touching, their laughter enclosed in warmth she could never enter. The wind carried the smell of wet asphalt and something metallic from the river. One step forward. Then another. Taking her further from the job she had just lost and closer to a home where Noah was sleeping in his jacket because she could not afford to heat the apartment. What Mia did not know was that her firing had been orchestrated. That there were people watching her. That the moment she saved a dying man in her diner, a clock would start ticking toward something she could not prevent. She only knew she was tired. Bone tired. The kind of tired that lived in your marrow and never left. The next afternoon, at 1:27 p.m., Marco Rossi sat in a penthouse apartment overlooking Rittenhouse Square. He was 28 years old, wearing a designer suit that cost more than Mia made in 6 months, his dark hair slicked back, a Rolex catching the light on his wrist. He was Alessandro's nephew, second in the family hierarchy, though he believed that position should be first. He believed the throne was his. He met with Pete Castellano in a private room lined with books Marco had never read. Marco handed over an envelope of cash, thick, substantial, the kind of money that made decisions for people. "You did well," Marco said. His smile was a blade wrapped in ice. "She is exactly where I need her. Desperate and alone." Pete counted the money with nervous fingers. "What do you want with some broke waitress?" "My uncle Alessandro has been untouchable for 20 years. Marco walked to the window, looking down at the city that should have been his to command. No weakness. No vulnerability. No crack. But every man has a breaking point. I just need to find the right leverage. He had been watching his uncle for months. Searching. Calculating. He learned that Alessandro secretly donated to St. Catherine's Hospital, the same hospital where an infant daughter had died 23 years ago, a wound his uncle kept locked behind careful silence and expensive suits. Marco believed that if he could engineer a situation where Alessandro became emotionally compromised, perhaps by saving someone vulnerable, someone who reminded him of loss, then Marco could manipulate that connection. Get close. Eventually take what was rightfully his. Mia was the perfect pawn. Drowning in debt. Isolated. Desperate. Working at the diner that Alessandro's men frequented at 3 a.m. after collections. Marco had arranged for her to be fired from the club, pushing her deeper into desperation, creating the exact circumstances for what came next. When people are drowning, Marco said, swirling expensive scotch, they will grab onto anything. Even a hand that means to pull them under. He made a phone call. Harold Brennan answered on the second ring. The eviction stands, Marco said without preamble. 5 days. Not 1 day more. Harold's voice crackled through the phone, hesitant. She has a kid, Marco. This feels. I don't pay you to feel, Harold. I pay you to follow orders. Marco hung up. He stared out at the rain-soaked city spread below him like a kingdom he was about to claim. He smiled. He did not know that his uncle was not a man made of stone. That the woman he chose as a pawn carried a strength that would unravel everything he built. That some pawns become queens. That night, at 11:52 p.m., Alessandro Rossi walked into Rose's diner. 3 days had passed since Mia saved his life. He moved without the careful slowness of a wounded man. His body had healed faster than it should have, private doctors and money making the impossible ordinary. He wore a charcoal suit despite the late hour, despite the rain. Sergio and Franco flanked him like bookends. Mia was wiping down the counter when she saw him. Her breath caught. Harold Brennan had been in the booth 30 minutes earlier, telling her in a voice loud enough for witnesses that she had 2 days left. Telling her that if she were nicest to him, they could work something out. Telling her in a whisper that made her skin crawl. His hand had reached toward her arm and she had flinched, a small movement, but enough. Now Alessandro saw Harold's face go pale. Saw him stumble backward, mumbling, rushing out into the rain. "Coffee," Alessandro said. "Black." Mia poured with hands that shook slightly. Around them, the diner was almost empty. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Rain drummed against the windows. Sergio and Franco sat in a booth across the room, their faces showing shock they tried to hide. "The man who just left," Alessandro said. "Not a question. He was threatening you." "My landlord. I owe him $85,000 from when my husband died. I have 2 days left before eviction." Mia set the coffee down harder than she intended. "I don't need a savior, Mr. Rossi. I've been taking care of myself and my son for a long time." "How old is he?" 7. "His name is Noah." Alessandro nodded slowly. Something flickered across his face, pain, maybe, or recognition. "I lost a child once. A daughter. She lived for 40 minutes. The words hung in the space between them, heavy with weight that had sat in his chest for 23 years. Mia felt something shift in her understanding of him. Power, she realized, did not protect you from devastation. Money did not buy immunity from loss. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You remind me of something." He paused, started again. "You acted when everyone else froze. You fought for a stranger's life like it mattered more than your own safety. That's rare. That's being human." "No," Alessandro said. "That's being extraordinary." He placed a business card on the counter. "When Harold comes back, and he will, you call me." He left with his men, their footsteps marking rhythm on the wet pavement outside. Mia picked up the card. Her thumb traced the embossed name, Alessandro Rossi. She had no idea what she held. She had no idea what was coming. The next morning, a woman's voice on the phone, cultured, cold, cutting through her sleep like a blade. "Mrs. Rivera? This is Evelyn Blackwell. I'm a friend of Harold Brennan's. I'd like to meet with you about your situation." They met at a cafe in Rittenhouse Square at 2 p.m. Evelyn Blackwell was 53 but looked 40, wearing a cream suit and pearls, her blonde hair perfectly styled. Old money. The kind of wealth that shaped city politics from behind closed doors. She sat across from Mia, ordered nothing, looked at Mia's thrift store coat with barely concealed disdain. "I can settle your debts," Evelyn said. "All 85,000. In exchange, I need a small favor." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, Mia with Alessandro at the diner. Mia getting into his SUV. The envelope of cash being slipped under her door. Evidence. Leverage. Proof. "You want me to spy on him," Mia said, her voice steady though her hands shook with anger. "He didn't save your life, dear. You saved his. And now I'm offering to save yours. Your debt vanishes. Your son keeps a home. All you have to do is tell me what Alessandro Rossi discusses with you." Mia stood. "No. You have 24 hours left, Mrs. Rivera. When you're living on the street with your son, remember you chose this. Mia walked out into the November cold, feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down like a hand on her chest. Behind her, Evelyn Blackwell smiled, a smile that held no warmth, only calculation. She was not a philanthropist but a power broker, and her interest in Alessandro had nothing to do with charity and everything to do with protecting an empire that was about to collapse. Outside, rain began to fall again. Mia had 24 hours before eviction. She had $2 in her pocket. She had a son who needed milk. She had a card with a phone number, but calling it would mean betraying the only person who had shown her kindness. Sometimes, she thought, there were no choices left. Only different ways to lose. But in the penthouse across the city, Alessandro Rossi was about to learn that the woman he thought was a stranger had already changed him in ways he did not yet understand. Sometimes the people who seem invisible carry the greatest light. The rain hammers against the windows of Mia Rivera's apartment like fists demanding entry. 6:45 in the morning. 73 minutes until eviction. She sits on the hardwood floor with her back pressed against the wall, Noah asleep across her lap, his small body still trembling from the crying that exhausted him hours ago. 4 cardboard boxes stacked in the corner, each one containing everything she owns. 2 duffel bags stuffed with clothes that barely fit her frame anymore, sizes smaller than last year because eating has become a luxury she could not afford. The handwritten list of debts sits folded in her jacket pocket, those numbers that have haunted her for 8 months like a curse that cannot be erased. $85,000. She has seen this number so many times that it no longer feels real. It feels like something that exists outside of her life, in some other dimension where consequences are numbered and catalogued and presented with the weight of a death sentence. Her hand is numb. The cold has seeped through the thin walls and settled in her bones, or maybe it is not the cold at all but the weight of every choice she has ever made leading her to this moment, to this floor, with her son, with $2 in her pocket and nothing left to bargain with except pride that nobody wants to buy. She thinks about the night she saved Alessandro Rossi. Her hands did not shake then. Her voice did not waver. In that moment, she was not invisible but necessary. One person saw her. One person looked at her like she mattered enough to save. Her phone sits beside her like a snake coiled and waiting. The business card is upstairs on the kitchen counter, that number written in black ink on expensive cream paper. She thinks about calling. Thinks about what it means to ask for help. Thinks about what it costs to admit you have failed. The rain intensifies. The sound of it fills the apartment like white noise, relentless and cold. Her finger hovers over the phone screen. Pride says throw it away. Desperation says call. Her finger finds the numbers before her mind can stop her hand. Alessandro answers on the second ring. His voice is alert despite the early hour, shaped like a blade wrapped in ice. Mia. She cannot speak. The words lodge in her throat like stones. I tried, she whispers. I tried to handle this myself. But I can't. I have 70 minutes and I don't know what to do. I don't want my son to see his mother fail. Silence on the line. 1 second becomes 2 becomes 5. Address, he says. She gives it. Stay there. Don't open the door for anyone. He hangs up. Leaves her in the sound of rain and the weight of a decision that will change everything. At 8:47 in the morning, 13 minutes before the scheduled eviction, 3 black SUVs pull up outside her building like dark ships arriving at a shore. The engines cut off. Doors open. Men step out. There is a particular sound to the movement of that many people at once, coordinated, purposeful, footsteps on wet pavement that make the pedestrians on the street stop and stare and understand without being told that something important is happening. Alessandro exits the center vehicle. He wears a black suit that costs more than Mia earned in 6 months, a coat of charcoal wool that hangs from his shoulders like authority. His dark hair is brushed back from a face carved from something harder than flesh, a scar running from below his left eye to his jawline like a map of violence survived. Behind him, Sergio and Franco and 10 other men in dark suits move like a military unit, each step measured, each man positioned with the precision of soldiers who have done this 1,000 times before. Harold Brennan is waiting in the lobby. He holds his eviction notice like a shield, a sheriff's deputy standing beside him with the uncomfortable posture of someone who knows he is about to witness something he does not have the rank to stop. Harold's face goes pale the moment he sees Alessandro walk through the front door. "Mr. Rossi, this is a private matter, I don't think." Alessandro does not slow. He moves through the lobby like a man walking through his own home, each step carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The deputy steps aside without being asked. Harold follows, sputtering, his voice rising to a pitch that echoes in the stairwell. Mia hears the footsteps before she sees the men. She opens the door on the third knock, her eyes red from crying but her spine straight. Noah peeks out from behind her legs, small and confused in his pajamas, holding the stuffed animal that smells like better days. Alessandro looks at the 4 cardboard boxes. At the duffel bags. At the 7-year-old boy with his mother's dark eyes. At Mia standing in the wreckage of her life. Something shifts across his face, a tightening of the jaw, a glint in his eyes that his men have learned to recognize as the moment before everything changes. He turns to Sergio without breaking his gaze from her. "Clear the entire debt. All of it. All 85,000. Today." Sergio's eyes widen almost imperceptibly. "All of it? All of it." Harold's face has gone the color of old newspaper. He stands in the hallway, sweating despite the cold, his voice cracking as it rises. "Mr. Rossi, I don't understand what's happening here." "You don't need to understand." Alessandro's voice drops to a quiet that is more terrifying than any shout. "The debt is paid. You will leave her alone. You will cross the street when you see her approaching. You will forget her name. If I hear that you have contacted her again, if I hear you have so much as looked at her, I will buy this entire building, evict every tenant you have ever charged, and demolish it to the foundation with you standing in the lobby." He pauses. "Am I understood?" Harold nods, his body trembling like an animal trapped in a corner. "Good. Get out of this building." Harold leaves. His footsteps descend the stairs in a rapid, panicked rhythm. The sheriff's deputy follows, confused and unwilling to escalate. But Alessandro is not finished. He pulls his phone from his jacket and makes a call in Italian, his voice dropping lower, words rapid and precise. "Bring her. Now." Mia does not understand what is happening. She watches his face, looking for clues, but finds none. Alessandro looks only at Noah. "What is your name?" he asks the boy, his voice different now, shaped differently, softer at the edges. "Noah," the boy whispers. "I am Alessandro. I am a friend of your mother's. You are very brave. You know that." Noah nods slowly, not sure if this is true but willing to believe it because his mother's shoulders have stopped shaking. 5 minutes later, 2 of Alessandro's men escort Evelyn Blackwell into the building. She is dressed in a designer raincoat, her hair protected by an expensive umbrella, her face arranged in the expression of someone accustomed to getting her way. That expression shatters when she sees Alessandro. "What is the meaning of this? You can't just. You approached Mia Rivera." Alessandro's voice is clinical now, the voice of a man presenting evidence. "You tried to recruit her as an informant against me. You offered to pay her debts in exchange for betrayal." Evelyn's face goes white. She opens her mouth. Closes it. Alessandro pulls out his phone, plays an audio recording. Evelyn's voice emerges from the speaker, clear and unmistakable. "All you have to do is tell me what Alessandro Rossi discusses with you." The recording plays for 30 seconds. Evelyn's voice continues, making promises, making threats, making the architecture of her manipulation clear to everyone in the hallway. "You had her followed," Alessandro continues. "You photographed her with me. You tried to weaponize a desperate woman suffering for your own purposes. I was content to let you operate as long as you stayed in your lane. But you made this personal. That was your mistake." He turns to Franco. Call Detective Morrison. Tell him we're ready. Franco makes the call. Within 18 minutes, 2 police detectives arrive with an air of grim purpose. Alessandro hands them a thumb drive. His voice is calm as he speaks. Financial records. Property deeds. Wire transfers. Communications between Evelyn Blackwell and Harold Brennan detailing money laundering operations, shell company creation, and offshore accounts designed to hide proceeds from illegal activities. My lawyers will provide testimony and evidence sufficient for federal prosecution. The detectives exchange a look. One of them moves toward Evelyn with handcuffs. You can't, Evelyn says, her voice breaking. I have connections, I have. You had connections, Alessandro says. Past tense. I made 3 calls this morning. Your board memberships are being revoked. Your foundation is under federal investigation. Your assets are frozen pending audit. By tomorrow, every news outlet in this city will be running stories about your arrest. You gambled that your wealth and your connections would protect you. You were wrong. The detective reads her rights in a monotone voice. Evelyn screams, thrashes, begs. Her voice echoes in the stairwell as they walk her down, and then it fades into the sound of rain outside, heavy and relentless. Mia stands in her doorway, holding Noah, watching a woman's entire life collapse in the space of 10 minutes. She does not feel triumph. She feels something else entirely, a shift in the world's weight, like the ground beneath her has been reordered and she is still learning how to stand on it. Alessandro turns to her. His expression is unreadable, but something in his eyes has changed. Your debt is paid, he says. Every cent starting now, you have a home. Your son has a school. You have what every person deserves to have, a chance to breathe. Mia's voice, when it comes, is barely a whisper. Why? Because the people who did this believed you were nobody. And that belief needs to be corrected. He steps closer. His hand reaches out, touches her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear she did not know she was crying. You saved my life, he says. That night, when I was bleeding on that floor. You gave me a reason to survive. Now it is my turn to save yours. Outside, the rain continues to fall, but inside the apartment, something has shifted toward light. Noah reaches out and takes Alessandro's hand. He looks small against the suited man, fragile, but his grip is firm. His voice is clear when he speaks. Will you stay? So Mommy is not scared. In that moment, Alessandro Rossi, the most feared man in Philadelphia, kneels down so he is level with a 7-year-old boy who has asked the simplest question in the world. His men watch from the hallway, shocked by what they are witnessing, by the fact that their boss, this man they have followed for 15 years, is capable of gentleness. Yes, Alessandro says. I will stay as long as you need me to. Meanwhile, across the city in a penthouse that overlooks the rain-soaked streets, Marco Rossi watches the news coverage of Evelyn Blackwell's arrest. His face drains of color with each passing moment. He had constructed his plan so carefully, Evelyn connected to Harold, Harold connected to Mia, Mia's desperation connected to his uncle. Now all 3 pieces have been removed from the board, and worse, Alessandro knows. His phone rings. When he sees the caller ID, his hand shakes as he answers. Uncle. My office. Now. Marco arrives at the family compound in Chestnut Hill at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun is beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of grey and deeper grey. Alessandro is waiting in his private study, a room lined with books he has read and documents he has signed, a room that has witnessed 40 years of decisions that shaped the city. Sergio and Franco stand by the door. They do not move, but their presence is felt like a weight in the air. You orchestrated her firing, Alessandro says. You pressured Harold Brennan to accelerate her eviction. You used her desperation as leverage to get close to me. You thought you could manipulate your way to power. Marco's hands shake. He cannot form words that would make a difference. I've known for 3 months that you were planning something, Alessandro continues. I let you move because I wanted to see how far you would go. The answer is too far. You're out, Marco. Out of the family, out of the business, out of my city. You can't, I'm blood. You tried to use an innocent woman suffering as a weapon against me. That is not family. That is cancer. Alessandro stands. You have until midnight to leave Philadelphia. If you are here at 12:01, my men will escort you to the airport. You will take nothing except the clothes you are wearing. Every asset you have ever controlled is being seized, transferred, dissolved. Every family in the Eastern Seaboard has been informed that you cannot be trusted. Go. Marco staggers out of the study, his entire world collapsed in less than 5 minutes. He does not understand what he has lost until much later, when he realizes that Alessandro has ensured he will spend the rest of his life as exactly what he accused Mia of being, nobody. The rain hammers against the penthouse windows like 1,000 impatient fists. Philadelphia spreads below them, a city of lights and shadows, streets that have seen both salvation and ruin. Alessandro Rossi stands motionless, his reflection ghosting across the glass, a man of 48 years who looks ancient in the way that power ages you, not in lines or silver hair, but in the weight behind the eyes. Mia's hand touches the cold window. The trembling has stopped. 1 year ago, her hand shook constantly. 1 year ago, she had $2 in her pocket and 5 days before eviction. Now she stands in a penthouse that costs more than she earned in a decade, and she is not afraid. For 23 years, Alessandro says, his voice deep and solid like an oath, I kept my daughter's nursery exactly as it was. The crib still had the mobile hanging above it. The rocking chair faced the window. I would sit there some nights and talk to her like she could still hear me. Like if I preserved that room, I preserved her. Mia does not turn around. Outside, rain streams down the glass in rivers that go nowhere, each drop identical to 1,000 others. You dismantled it, she says. Not a question. A week after you saved my life, yes. I donated everything to St. Catherine's Hospital. The same hospital where she died. Where I have spent 23 years trying to bury my grief in marble and endowments and the names of buildings. He steps closer, not touching her, but close enough that she feels the gravity of him. Because you taught me something I had forgotten. What? That life belongs to people who act. Not to people who freeze. Not to people who preserve rooms like tombs. Life belongs to people who move forward even when it costs them everything. His reflection in the window is darker than the city lights behind him. You were a stranger who had every reason to run. You stayed. You were drowning in debt, starving, afraid, and you still reached out to save someone else. That is not weakness. That is the kind of strength I spent my whole life trying to protect but never possessed myself. Mia's eyes fill with tears that she does not wipe away. The salt taste of them touches her lips. You possessed it. You just needed a reason to use it again. Alessandro steps closer, close enough that their reflections merge into one shape. I thought you were a stranger that night. A woman I would never see again. But the woman who refused to be bought, who would not betray me even when it cost her everything, who rebuilt herself and her son from absolute nothing, that woman stopped being a stranger a long time ago. The rain intensifies. Thunder rolls somewhere over the Delaware River, and the sound travels through the building like a heartbeat returning to life. What are you saying? Mia asks, her voice barely a whisper. I am saying that I spent a year protecting you because I owed you my life. But somewhere in the last 12 months, it stopped being about debt. It stopped being about obligation or responsibility or payment. He reaches for her hand, and his palm is warm against her cold fingers. It started being about something else entirely. You and Noah are the reason I wake up wanting to be better than the man I was yesterday. You are the reason I dismantled that room and chose to live forward instead of dying backward in my grief. Mia turns to face him fully. The scar that runs from his left eye to his cheekbone catches the light. She has learned that scar has a name, a rival from 1998, a blade that missed his eye by centimeters. He has carried that mark for a quarter-century. You saved me too, she says. Not just from the debts or the eviction or Harold Brennan's cruelty. You saw me when I was invisible. You treated me like I mattered when every other person in my life had made it clear that I was disposable. Alessandro reaches up and touches her face, his fingers careful against her cheekbone. His hands have ordered terrible things. His hands have signed documents that sealed men's fates. But now his hands shake slightly as they touch her, and this trembling is more powerful than any violence he has ever commanded. Mia, he says, and her name sounds different when he says it, not a label, but a prayer. She reaches up and touches the scar, traces it from temple to jawline. What happens now? She asks. Alessandro closes his eyes at her touch. Below them, Philadelphia continues. Taxis honk in the rain. Sirens wail somewhere in the distance. The city is indifferent to them, uncaring of the two people standing in this penthouse choosing each other when choosing is the hardest thing either of them has ever done. Now we live, he says quietly. Forward. Together. I have spent 23 years running from my grief, Mia. Not moving forward, running backward, preserving what was dead, protecting what could not be saved. You walked into a diner at 3 in the morning and saved a dying man. That single act of courage created ripples. It destroyed corruption. It rebuilt broken lives. It reminded me what it means to actually be alive instead of simply surviving. He pulls her close. His expensive suit, worth more than her entire annual salary from the diner, presses against the simple black dress she wears. Nothing has changed about their circumstances. He is still powerful. She is still the woman who had nothing. But something fundamental has shifted, like the moment when rain finally stops and the sky begins to clear. I love you, Alessandro says, and the words sound strange in his mouth because he has not said them in years. Maybe decades. Maybe never. I love you not because you are grateful or beautiful or because you owe me anything. I love you because you are the kind of person who sees a stranger dying and thinks only about saving him. Because you are invisible to a world that does not deserve to see you, but I see you. I see you completely. Mia's tears fall now, and she does not stop them. She lets them fall because she has earned the right to cry, earned it through 8 years of silence, through double shifts and starvation wages, through the moment she chose to save a life instead of calling 911 and walking away. I love you too, she whispers. I think I have since that night. Since you looked at me and asked my name like I was worth knowing. Like I was not invisible. They stand together as the rain continues to fall, as the city glows beneath them, as the moment stretches out like a held breath finally being released. Outside this penthouse, in the apartment she now owns, in the school where Noah is learning to read, in the therapy office where she is finally processing the scars on her back that no one should ever have inflicted, in all of these places, Mia Rivera is no longer drowning. 1 year ago, she saved a dying man in a diner at 3:22 in the morning. She had no idea that single act of courage would transform her from nobody into someone. That it would dismantle an empire of corruption. That it would remind a man who had spent his life frozen in grief that life is meant to be lived, not preserved. Sometimes the people who seem invisible carry the greatest light. Sometimes a widow with $2 in her pocket and 5 days before eviction is the strongest person in the room. Sometimes the most dangerous man in a city is brought to his knees not by a rival, not by a blade, not by a bullet, but by a woman who had nothing left to give and gave everything anyway. Mia and Alessandro stand in that penthouse above Philadelphia, rain drumming against the windows like the beating of a second chance. They are no longer invisible to each other. They are no longer alone. And below them, the city continues its ancient work of breaking people and building them back stronger, indifferent to the small miracle of two invisible people finally being seen. If this story moved you, if you have ever felt invisible, if you have ever acted when everyone else froze, if you believe that the greatest courage looks like a nobody woman saving a stranger in the darkness, drop a like right now. Share this with someone who needs to remember that they matter. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story about the people the world overlooks until the moment they change everything. Comment below, what would you have done in Mia's position? Would you have saved him? Would you have called that number? Tell us your story. Because unlike the world in this story, here nobody is invisible. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. After the rain, the sky clears. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We will see you again in the next video.